morning from the Palmetto subdivision of the Little Manatee River. I'm sure, as you guys know by this point, L700, the Bradenton local, still serves the Tropicana plant in Bradenton, but unfortunately the shipments by said company are very inconsistent and often very small. So we obviously don't have a juice train anymore. It's just kind of whatever gets onto this local, and there's usually not a lot of reefers coming in and out of Bradenton anymore. Today, however, should be an exception. Another thing too is that they often have those cryo-trans leased reefers. I've heard a few reasons as to why they do this, and I don't know which one's true, so it doesn't really matter to me. I could care less for them, but the matter of it is that they're there, and there's not going to be any getting rid of them. So this morning, however, there should be a pretty significant difference in today's southbound L700. I guess I'll include a car count later, but there should be quite a few Tropicana reefers coming home, and a few cryo-trans, of course, but significantly more than one than the other. So it is just after 6 o'clock a.m. Guess we're gonna wait and see what happens. The swing bridge is closed, but it's remote, so they can do that from anywhere. So this is just a matter of when he shows up now. Alrighty, folks. About 7:15 in Tally-Ho.
Approach the Manatee, southbound.
I doubt that most of you document this train as much as I do to feel the same satisfaction that I did in this moment, but crossing the Little Manatee River with nothing but Tropicana cars visible should give you somewhat of an idea if you've been watching any trains in Central Florida that carry these cars or others like it. But for those of you who aren't, within the last few years, the Tropicana business in this area of Florida has changed very significantly. With citrus juice consumption on the decline and Tropicana supposedly at a shortage of their own cars, movements of Tropicana products in this area have often been little and riddled with leased cars, such being those cryo-trans reefers. So much so that sometimes those cryo cars are more prevalent than Tropicana's own cars on their own trains. However, such wouldn't be the case this morning. Although there has been a significant decline in the consumption of citrus juices over the last few years, I believe that these smaller trains in and out of Bradenton is more of a result of the fact that Tropicana doesn't run its own train anymore. Since 2017, these cars have only been part of a local south of Tampa, and since late 2019, they've been mixed into regular freight trains everywhere. In fact, every reefer on this morning's southbound train had arrived in Tampa the afternoon of the previous day on M441, the new train identification for the daily manifest freight out of Waycross for Tampa. As a result of the cars being combined with other freights and thereby having different delays in different yards all across the system, the amount of cars that will end up returning to a plant at any given time is no longer standardized and very random. And all of the aforementioned is also the reasoning for this: miscellaneous freight between cuts of reefers. Again, these reefers only arrive in Bradenton on behalf of a local train, a train which purpose is to serve the Tropicana yard in Bradenton. That means that anything going to the yard, including this miscellaneous freight, will make it into the train. But it's also part of the reason that you really can't see a Tropicana Juice Train anymore. But this morning's L709, with 33 reefers in the consist, will be one of the closest things that we'll get to a Tropicana train these days. So yeah, it was worth getting out of the house for. to the longest juice train contest we've had down here in a while. Good stuff. Train now crossing Experimental Farm Road just outside of Palmetto, we're beginning to fall into the lowlands of the Big Manatee River, and with long straight track and vegetation cut back, it gives us a good chance to see just how long this consist is, and for those of you familiar with the changes, the contrast between a normal consist and today's inbound. If nothing else, this morning's outing was all but a nostalgia trip to just get a little taste of the way things used to be all but half a decade ago. I guess that I can't stress enough just how uncommon it is nowadays to get a train like this of so many Tropicana owned cars and so little of the leased pieces that have made themselves so prevalent over the last 4 years. Of course, there's always the eyesore of the mixed freight as well, but you know what? You get what you get. And even so, this morning was a very special occasion. Such is why me and my grandmother would be celebrating this morning with a couple of bottles of Tropicana ourselves. Continuing down the old Atlantic coastline, scenes all along US 41 into Bradenton are also changing, with urban development and gentrification at an all-time high. New communities and subdivisions are going up all around. So, hardly anything along the Palmetto subdivision between Manatee and Hillsborough counties looks anything the way it used to. But at the very least, some places still hold their nostalgic feel, such as where we'd set up next at 3rd Avenue West. On the south side of the Big Manatee River, the crossing signals and most of the scenery looks just about the way it did when I shot my first ever juice train here back in February of 2016. Alright, well, there's two. One of the biggest Tropicana consists that I have shot in quite some time. Unfortunately, with the decline in Tropicana's business, frankly, there's not so much consistency with getting trains of this size anymore, but every now and then you'll get one, and this morning we did, and only 3 of them were cryo trains, so I had to take advantage of the opportunity. So, a little toast to them, if you will. It was worth the occasion. Some pulp's alright. So let's run down real quick to 26th Avenue in the yard and we'll finish up here. By the time that we had got there, our crew had already pulled most of the train south of the yard, getting ready to shove the train back into the yard tracks, breaking it up into 2 of them, breaking the train apart about halfway through. The reasoning behind this odd yarding maneuver can be traced back to the days of the Atlantic Coast Line and Seaboard Airline, and the merging of the 2 companies which occurred in 1967. Both companies had routes through Bradenton, however once the 2 merged, the new SCL would abandon the old ACL stretch from Bradenton southeast to Arcadia, and thus the old at-grade crossing between the 2 that used to be here was removed, and a switch would be put in its place to conjoin the old ACL into the old SAL. However, following this conjunction, the SCL would go on to reroute almost all of its trains over the old ACL's AZA line to Tampa. Resultingly, the old SAL route out of Bradenton through Palmetto, Ellington, Parrish, and Waimama was now a redundant extra main. And so the new SCL would go on to abandon this line north of Bradenton, meaning that the direct access to Tropicana Yard from the north via the old SAL route had been lost, leaving us with what we have today, an odd southward-facing stub-end yard. But they've made it work over the years, and for our southbound train it would be pretty straightforward. Pull south, line the switch, and shove it in. While still blocking 26th Avenue, our train would come to a stop as one of the yard tracks has been filled up. The conductor back in the yard would make a cut between 2 of the cars, then instructing the engineer to pull what's left of the train back out past the switch. Oh yeah, as we progress, most folks waiting in line could care less to wait or see what's gonna happen here, which I almost find hilarious considering the amount of joy that I take in this process. Anyhow, pulling our train back out past the first switch, the conductor would then line that switch, and then another, before shoving the rest of our train back into another empty yard track. All arriving cars to the Tropicana yard will be inspected for roadworthiness before moving to any loading docks, and the 2 tracks that our train is being shoved into will allow for seamless inspection by yard employees on golf carts. This here would end our morning outing with the scene of CSX shoving only Tropicana cars into a Tropicana plant, the way that it should be. At age 21, Anthony T. Rossi would arrive in the United States with $25 in his pocket and would go on to found the Florida company Tropicana in 1946. I can't help but wonder what old Sir Rossi would think of his old Florida Citrus Company now. On the ex-Seaboard Sarasota line at milepost SW873.7, this is Kotabeaner, and I will see you next time somewhere along the Sunshine State Rails.